Hi, my name is Terry Thornton. The Ten Commandments are found in Exodus chapter 20. They're part of God's covenant with his people. Let's look at how they're foundational to the rest of the law given through Moses and how they reveal God's character throughout the entire Old Testament, which includes the law, history, poetry, and prophecy. Here are the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make idols. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet. The first thing we notice in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1, and in other scriptures is that God audibly spoke the Ten Commandments. Compare this with idols, which do not speak. We read in Psalm 115, verses 4 and 5, their idols are silver and gold, the work of human hands. They have mouths, but do not speak. And the prophet Jeremiah describes idols as scarecrows that cannot speak and have to be carried around because they cannot walk. Before God gave the Ten Commandments, he reminded them of who he is and that he had redeemed them. He said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He is the God of history, and we see this concept of redemption and deliverance throughout the entire Old Testament. God takes the initiative to redeem us. God's desire is to be our God and for us to be his people. So we see that the first four commandments are about our relationship with God, and the last six are about our relationships with other people. First, God says, I am the Lord. If God is God, that means he has the right and the authority to tell us how we should live. God said to have no other gods before him, to not make idols in any likeness of what is in the heavens, the earth, or in the waters under the earth. God is the creator. He's the God of creation, including the universe, the earth, and everything that's in them. Idolatry is a big theme we see throughout the Old Testament. God does not tolerate rivals. Throughout Israel's history, they would stray from God and worship idols, and this caused a lot of problems for them, including conquest from other nations and exile from the land that God had promised them. God commands us to not take his name in vain, to not misuse his name. It is his concern for his own name that leads him to act on behalf of his people. In Ezekiel 36:20 through 28, God promises that even though his name was profaned by his own people, he will vindicate his holy name by gathering his people, cleansing them from idolatry, giving them a new heart, and giving them his spirit. He also commands us to keep the Sabbath. And since we see that God is the God of history, the God of creation, keeping the Sabbath commemorates his creation of the world in 6 days and resting on the seventh. It also shows that he is a God we can trust to provide for us. Then we transition from our obligations to God to our obligations to others, beginning with the two people who brought us into the world. The fifth commandment is to honor our father and our mother. Number 6 is you shall not murder. Now keep in mind that the Hebrew word ratzah means murder, not kill. This is a prohibition of the criminal act of taking another's life or causing human death through carelessness or negligence. Number 7 is you shall not commit adultery. Marriage is important to God, and he expects husbands and wives to be faithful to one another. And it's also interesting to note that throughout the Old Testament, God equates the worship of idols to adultery. Idolatry is spiritual adultery. The prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel said the people of Israel had committed adultery by worshiping idols. And in Jeremiah 31:32, God said his people had broken the covenant with him, even though he had loved them as a husband loves his wife. Number 8 is you shall not steal, and this includes kidnapping, which is stealing people. Number 9 is you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And lastly, you shall not covet. Covet is defined as desiring wrongfully without regard for the rights of others. This last commandment is interesting. Lying, stealing, murdering, committing adultery, these are external sins, and they leave victims. But coveting is an internal sin. How do you know if someone's being covetous? How do you legislate that? Who is the victim? Is coveting a victimless sin? No, you are the victim. This shows God's concern for our hearts, something that resonates throughout the Old Testament. Jeremiah 31:31 through 34, God promises to make a new covenant with his people, with his law written on their hearts. And in Ezekiel 36:26, God promises to give us a new heart. The stone tablets the Ten Commandments were written on were kept inside the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark's cover, called the mercy seat, was the place of atonement. In Leviticus 16:2, God tells Moses that the place of atonement is where he is present. This is a beautiful picture of God's grace. Yes, God gave the Ten Commandments, the law, his statutes, his instructions, but they were enclosed inside the place where we find grace and mercy and atonement. And that's the theme of the Old Testament. God instructs us on how to live with him and how to live with others, and he always extends his grace, redemption, mercy, and deliverance.